guys? Welcome to another Holding Court. I'm excited to have on a very busy guy in hockey media. You've seen him on Morning Cup of Hockey as well as the NHL Network. Former college hockey player and current analyst, Jonny Lazarus. Jonny, thank you, man.
You got it, Nick. What's going on? How you doing?
Well, let's
Repping
address
the shirt. Yeah, first thing I noticed, I saw
a
the
couple USA hockey guys.
Yeah.
How are you feeling?
I mean, what a game last night, right? Didn't look like it was going to go well at the start, and then a lucky bounce turns that whole game around. I think I saw the shots were like 32-11 for the U.S. after the first period. So, you got to credit Finland, though. They played a hell of a game.
Yeah, Finland's always a tough one. They always kind of worry me, but I feel like the USA team wasn't quite the wagon. It wasn't quite the smooth sailing as it was maybe the last couple seasons. It was they just had such a squad, but they really pulled it together. Some of those guys really just took the bull by the horns on that one. But so from there, I mean, I don't think either of us are too heartbroken about how it ended up for Canada.
No, definitely not.
But what are a lot was made about Canada's roster selection, and people were kind of calling it from the beginning, like, hey, this might not end well for us Canadians because of our roster selection, leaving a ton of first rounders at home. Actually,
third overall.
What was that?
Third overall pick. I think that's the biggest surprise. Becca Seneke.
Yeah, Anaheim kid. And then, our guy Liam Greentree here in LA was another huge one. I mean, he's killing it right now. A captain of Windsor. 38 games played. He's got 29 goals, 39 assists, 68 points in 38 games in the OHL. I mean, and that might not have even been the biggest snub on the roster. Zane Parekh was another one.
Misa.
Yeah, Michael Misa. I mean, just it goes on and on. So a lot was made about that. Do you think that's kind of a fair gripe against Hockey Canada?
Well, and they didn't win, so no matter what you say, like, obviously the roster's not good enough, right? So I think, had they won, maybe people aren't as angry, but the results speak for themselves, right? They lose to Latvia, they lose to Czechia. I mean, they don't even get to the semifinal. They don't even make it to the top four. So, like, any gripe, no matter what you say, it's hard to disagree with, right? Obviously, this is a results-based tournament, and Canada, the host country, doesn't even medal. I think back-to-back years they lost in the quarterfinal too. So it's been, a disappointing, past couple World Juniors for the Canadians. And, quite frankly, like, growing up for me, like, this was a Canadian tournament. Right? Canada dominated. Like, when I was a kid, I remember they won like 5 straight World Juniors. Like, this was their tournament. And the Canadians take a lot of pride in it. And with that comes a lot of negativity when they don't do well. I'm not saying that negativity is warranted, but, I think these kids also understand the pressure that they're under when they put on the Team Canada jersey, and they didn't perform. So people are going to be angry by that. That's how sports operate. Do I think it's fair? Not always. But I don't think it's anything that, these kids didn't expect.
Yeah, two straight tournaments of Canada not medaling, which
Michael
by their
Robble,
standard is unacceptable.
Czechia goalie, UMass guy.
What was that?
The Czechia goalie, Michael Robble, I think first goalie ever to knock him out 2 years in a row. He's the UMass starting goalie.
Right, yeah, there you go. And then you have a guy, Maple Leafs prospect, Easton Cowan, who he was catching a lot of hell. I would say unwarranted. It felt like he was just singled out amongst, I wouldn't even say hockey media, because I don't feel like it was a very, intelligent.
I don't think it was media, for the most part.
I would say probably like hockey Twitter or something. But it was, he was getting a lot of hell, and I just thought that was kind of interesting, to pick a whipping boy, especially a junior age player. But yeah, I mean, it's okay because I'm perfectly fine with the U.S. winning another gold. So, as I mentioned, you're a former NCAA guy. With I see your UMass
Yep.
sweaters behind you
Mercier's,
there.
UMass. Yep.
Yeah. Uh, so, you played hockey at a high level, and then you jumped over to media, and seemed like you had pretty quick success. Honestly, was that kind of a transition you were planning while you were playing, or is it kind of just came spontaneously?
Uh, I think it, from a peripheral view, I think it definitely seems like it happened faster than maybe it felt like for me. I mean, obviously things did spiral a little bit quickly, but from my junior year of college, I was doing stuff in media. So like, yeah, I guess this was kind of like a plan. Did I think it would ever come to fruition like it has? Definitely not. My junior year, I was redshirting in college. The rules have changed since, but I transferred, excuse me, from UMass to Mercyhurst. And in that year, I couldn't travel with the team on the road and I couldn't play in games. So, with that, I was kind of searching for some sort of other identity because obviously I had associated myself with being a hockey player my entire life. And when you take away being able to play games, it's like, a long look in the mirror to find yourself. And teammates of mine in the past and at the time had said like, you have a good personality for hockey, like don't waste it. And with that, I never knew like what that really meant. Um, but honestly, like a big like inspiration, I guess would be the word of mine was the introduction to Spit and Chicklets. Like I first heard of it, I think my freshman year or sophomore year when Charlie McAvoy went on, because Charlie McAvoy and I were good friends when we were younger, like around 16, 17. We trained together in the summers and stuff. So I heard his interview on there, and then I started listening to their show. And obviously, Biz is now the probably biggest personality in hockey. But at the time, like Biz was one of those guys talking about dealing with being a fourth line guy, with being a healthy scratch, and how he operated as a teammate, being in that situation. And I was going through it as a player at the time, and I felt like I resonated so much with him. And he almost made it. I don't want to say he made it like cool to not be a good player, but he almost gave guys like me, the guys who struggled to get in the lineup and guys who tried to bring a positive attitude to the rink every day, like a voice, and I just tried to be as positive as I could, and I brought that to the media, like to the media side of me. So when I spoke to players, when I asked questions, when I interviewed athletes, like I always just tried to bring out the fun side. And that's something that's so important to me. And I think it's something that hockey had lacked at the time, where everything you hear from other people is that, oh, it's an old man sport and they don't have any fun and they're too serious. And I got sick and tired of hearing that. So I was like, you know what, let me just try to talk to hockey players and not, make it a hockey interview, make it a fun interview. And, for me, it just kind of seemed natural. And I think that's maybe why, I found a little bit of success in it because, I've been in the room with a lot of these guys and I know how they think and I know how they operate. But to that same point, I've never played in the NHL. So I still have that like fan aspect as well, right? Where I'm so curious of what the day to day is like. I'm so interested in what their routines are and what they do away from the rink and that stuff. So I think for me, just, I kind of always try to keep that balance of being a fan. And people have told me, you know, you're supposed to be neutral. Don't be a fan. But in my mind, it's like that's really what separates me is like being knowledgeable, but also being a passionate fan. I never want to lose that.
Yeah, for sure. I'm right there with you on Spit and Chicklets. Like it was interesting watching them completely blow up, and it was cool for the sport because, like you said, I also noticed there's kind of a reputation around hockey and hockey guys just as being very vanilla and like kind of just in a box and stoic and not a ton of personality really marketed, I guess, by the NHL and stuff. So yeah, I'm right there with you, and I think they really did help kind of break that mold a little bit. So it's been good, and we've seen other podcasts blow up as well. But you're a New Yorker. Did you I'm a Californian. I'm wondering if you kind of had the same sort of inclination to kind of, help advocate and grow the game in maybe a non-traditional hockey market? Was that something that kind of like crossed your mind at all?
Um, it's interesting, right? Like growing up, I never thought of New York as a non-traditional hockey market.
Okay.
Um, maybe it wasn't as popular as other sports. Like we had a high school hockey team, and like there was a high school league, and obviously there was like a AAA league on Long Island. But there weren't a lot of guys who had gone pro before my age group. But like, the players within my age group were, I grew up kind of around like Sonny Milano, Adam Fox, Charlie McAvoy, Kevin LeBanc, guys who were well known at a national scale when we were younger. So for me, it was never really like we're not known, you know. But looking at it now, I do think that Long Island and New York has become a bit of a hockey hotbed, and I think it's because of those guys like I just mentioned, Fox, McAvoy, Milano, Jeremy Bracco is another one, and I'm probably missing a few. Shane Pinto, like Marshall Warren. There's so many guys that were just so good that I never thought of it as like a non-traditional market. And obviously the New York Rangers being an original six, it's like, it's different. But yeah, I don't know what it was like for Californians. But growing up around so many elite young players who are now in the NHL, I never had that feeling that it wasn't very popular until I got older and realized that there aren't a lot of guys who haven't made the league from Long Island. I think like Rob Scuderi was like, and Chris Higgins maybe like were the only guys that I knew like growing up.
You mentioned Jeremy Bracco. That's interesting. That is he's a New York kid?
Yeah, Long Island. Honestly, he was like, we don't really keep in touch that much anymore, but growing up, we were pretty friendly, and he was the best hockey player I've ever seen in my life. Like to me, like he invented the mohawk, like where guys open up their hips and like Jeremy Bracco on the Long Island Goals. I played against them my 16U year, and I watched them a lot growing up just because I had friends in that team. Like he would just duck, walk, or mohawk around the offensive zone and find someone backdoor, and it'd be a tap-in goal. Like he was unbelievable.
Kid was so talented. He's one of those players you watch and you're like, how did this guy not play 300 or 400 games in the show? Like how does that happen? He was so good, just at all the levels. Even you see guys who are playing their pro careers and they're killing it in their respective leagues. Sometimes KHL or sometimes they're stuck in the AHL or whatever it may be, but just absolutely torching it. And he was one of those guys. I mean, just so talented and a guy who had a lot of success for USA Hockey too. But yeah, it's interesting you bring him up because you never really hear his name, but I always just thought that guy was so good, and it's like, dang, how does he not get a shot?
Yeah, there's so many kids who get the opportunity and sometimes are just in a bad situation. And then there are other guys who, maybe aren't as highly touted that just get put in a right fit and thrive. Hockey is a very interesting sport in that sense. Like I knew so many young guys when I was like 16 that I thought were like the next coming of Gretzky that just never even got to set foot on D1. It's a very long, I don't know if process is the right word, but it's a long journey to get there. And sometimes the kids who are even that much better when they're younger, like can get burnt out by the time they're older. Like I was a late bloomer. Like I was not good till I was like 16 or 17. I played AA hockey till I was 15. And I don't know, like everyone's really just different, but I've seen guys who, I didn't think were much when I was younger that are now in the NHL and doing well. Like it's just everyone's development is so different. It's crazy.
Yeah, it definitely happens. And so I want to make our way to the NHL pretty soon here, especially what's going on there in New York. But before we do, just one last kind of little touch on some NCAA hockey. So, as we mentioned, you played NCAA hockey. How would you say your experience was with NCAA hockey? Do you remain to be like a college hockey route advocate? Because things are changing in a big way, so probably gonna be a lot more kids going that route. Are you pretty big advocate of going that route, or are you big on the CHL too?
I mean, I have no experience with the CHL, so I can't even like speak to it. But college hockey is the best and hardest 4 years of your life. Um, Depending on what kind of player you are, like my college experience to me, it was like, listen, I'm fortunate enough where I love what I do. Like my career is awesome every day. Like to me is so fun. So I've had way more fun post college than I did in college. But that's not everybody. And listen, I'm not gonna like sugarcoat it. College hockey is a grind. It is a job, and there's a lot of pressure to perform. Like, the mental battle is honestly probably harder than the physical battle because you feel like you have to be the best every day, and that's not easy. So for me, college was a struggle. Like I felt like I learned a lot and grew a lot and matured a lot mentally, but the early parts of my career, I was beating myself up like every day mentally. Like I was, the ups and downs are, I'm losing, I'm kind of struggling to find words because it is an emotional thing to talk about for me. Like, I came in and I felt so high. Like I, made a great first impression with the coaching staff. I was getting second line minutes, second power play time as a freshman, and I wasn't even expecting to play as a freshman, which completely flipped my mentality. And once you get a taste of it, it's like a drug, right? Like you just want to be out there, you want to succeed, you want to score goals. I scored in my first 2 games, so I was just like feeling the most confidence in the world. And then when things go bad, it's like, can I even play at this level? And you're just questioning yourself every day, and you're trying to learn new things and treat your body right and learn about nutrition and be in the weight room. And there were so many things that I didn't know going into college. Like I had always thought I worked hard, but I didn't even see what hard work was till I got to college. Like some of the guys around me on my team were machines. And I just wasn't built that way, or I didn't train that way, and I didn't grow up that way. Like hockey was always, for me, it was like really just a fun thing. My parents, they had asked me as a kid if I wanted to wake up at 6 a.m. and go to the rink and do the extra stuff, but I wasn't that kind of kid. Like I loved hockey, but I never really put in the extra work. So for me, college was a real reality check on like how good these players are, and that's why I think the NCAA is the best route. Like you learn so much about not only things as a player on the ice, but like what to do with your body and everything away from it, and honestly, how to just be an adult because you have to balance class with um, playing hockey and everything else around it, relationships and friendships. It just sets you up for everything post college, and that's why for me, like my career and everything I've done post college has been a little bit easier just because of my experience in college. But it's not easy for everyone, and for me, I was one of those kids who definitely struggled for the majority of my college career, but it's set me up for some stuff post college, and for that I'll always be grateful.
Yeah, and in the last few years or so, NCAA hockey has taken even another step with just churning out NHL superstar caliber talent. I mean, just this last draft, Macklin Celebrini, Canadian kid who went the college route. So that is a a huge deal for the NCAA. And just you look at teams like Minnesota, Michigan, and just the quality of players coming out of there now is just it's crazy. And then you have the new ruling for the CHL NCAA ruling where now probably a lot more players are going to even be going that route. So do you have any kind of like thoughts or kind of like predictions on how that's going to play out?
As far as like the Canadians specifically, or
Yeah, with the new ruling, the CHL players now pretty much being able to go over to the NCAA, and now there's no risk of losing eligibility now, and all of that. So
yeah, I mean, I think the CHL players are probably more often than not going to go to college. You get the best of both worlds. If you're an elite CHL player, you can play there from 16 to 18 and then go right into college. I mean, why not do both? That said, I don't think CHL kids or Canadian kids are going to want to come and play in the USHL. That's a shame for the United States Hockey League. And with that said, too, I think some American kids might want to go over to Canada and try the CHL, right, and get the best of both worlds in that sense. So what I think and what I hope, at least for the junior leagues, is that they can almost combine and make one elite North American junior hockey league. So kids aren't forced to choose between Canada and the U.S. and they can have one route. It's almost like a pre-college college, right? Like if you're doing it that way. So. I think that makes it easier for college scouts, for college coaches, if they could have one avenue to find players. But that's probably a story for a different day. But I would think most Canadians, if they have the chance to do both, why not do both?
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's probably what we're going to end up seeing. So moving on to the NHL. You do a great job covering the New York Rangers, and it's been fun following you because that's been
a big talking point.
I'll be nice here. It's been entertaining what's been going on with the Rangers this year. I mean, just crazy. Like I don't think anyone expected the Rangers to have this kind of season. I mean, so much has happened. I guess we'll start with the Trouba trade because once again I saw some of your commentary on it and I thought it was like spot on and I thought you were.
What did I say?
Well, you were taking an angle that a lot of people forget about and they weren't talking about, but you kind of like noted sort of the personal side. And apparently it was like a very contentious relationship and trade between Trouba and the Rangers. But yeah, you were mentioning sort of what was going on as far as like on the personal side. Actually, my last guest I had on was Annie Montoya, who works in she does relocation for players and works with players during trades and helps the families and all that stuff. So she also was really shedding a lot of light on the personal side, not the business side that we hear about all the time, but what goes on behind the scenes in the actual house. And I think there was a lot going on there as far as with Jacob Trouba and then, what ended up happening with that relationship. It's shocking to me because, as a hockey fan, and I guess an old school kind of guy, I absolutely love Jacob Trouba. If I'm an NHL GM, like I want that guy on my squad. And, obviously there's a lot of other factors and stuff, but it was, I found that whole debacle very shocking. What are your thoughts on the Trouba trade? And were you a Trouba guy, or because a lot of fans were not?
Yeah, no, I was. I am a Trouba guy, and again, like my whole outlook, I think, is usually different. When you interact with the players, I think you grow more of an appreciation for them, and even vice versa. If some guys aren't nice to you, then you might grow to not like them. But being around guys, like I've always said too, like Capo Caco, I was not a fan of Caco's game, but as a player, or as a guy, excuse me, always one of my favorite people to talk to. Like, always gave the media time, was always honest, and I love talking to him. I do. But I criticized his game because I wasn't a fan of it. Trouba, the only reason I wasn't a fan of Trouba was because of how much money he made. And I think that's the issue that most fans in New York had. If Trouba was making $4 million or $3 million, I don't think the issue would be there. But when you have an $8 million defenseman playing as the third pair guy, like it's just not the recipe for success. And I think that's why fans and that's why management wanted to move him out of here because he's not playing up to his dollar amount, right? And that's something that you need if you're going to win a Stanley Cup. And I know the Rangers were 2 wins away from the Cup twice or the Cup final twice, but it wasn't good enough. And I think now fans have understood that, like, sure, this is a good hockey team, but it's not good enough, even at their best. So you got to do something to fix it. And I think opening up that money and clearing up that cap room was the first and obvious choice. Obviously, Barclay Goodrow as well. So, while it sucks to see Trouba leave because I genuinely liked him, I understood the business decision behind it. And while it may have not been optically what was the best or most positive thing, I think both sides needed to move on, and they did. And I'm sure looking back at how everything did go down, if they were to redo that conversation in the summer, maybe it would have been a little bit more peaceful. Trouba probably wouldn't have changed his mind. I think Trouba would have wanted to be in New York with his family as long as possible because he's a family guy and he's very honest about that. And I think any human being would sympathize with that and agree with that. Um, but yeah, I mean, maybe both parties would want to just redo that whole situation if they can look back on it and change it.
You mentioned Capo Caco too. That's another, I guess you would say, shocking trade. Definitely no one had that on their bingo card going into the season.
I wanted to trade him last year, so
Really?
yeah.
Wow.
I thought his value was higher last year.
You had to be in the minority on that one, though, right? Amongst
For the most
Rangers
part.
fans? Or?
Yeah, for the most part. I mean, Ranger fans love him, and I'm not gonna say that Ranger fans shouldn't love him. Like I said, he's a great guy. I think the people who I'm a stats guy, but I don't think stats tell the whole story. Like Caco has good underlying metrics and good numbers stats wise, so I get why people love him. But I see a guy who gets scoring chances but doesn't score. So while that could be looked at as a positive because you're adding good stuff to the pile, at some point those chances have to turn into goals. And you're seeing it in Seattle right now too. He has like one goal, I think, in his first 7 games. Like it's not like he's automatically just going to turn into a goal scorer. So I think there was a rumor last year that the Rangers could have gotten Henrique and Frank Vetrano, who I love, in a trade with Kako and maybe Othman and a pick or something like that. I'm not exactly sure who was in the mix on the Rangers side. I just know Kako was involved, and I think people were very against trading Kako at the time. And who knows?
What's your overall kind of assessment of the job Chris Drury's done so far in New York?
I don't think all of his decisions have been great, but at least he's trying. And I think a lot of GMs are afraid to make these kind of moves, but Chris Drury at least has shown he's not afraid. Sure, while he's ruffled some feathers, maybe relationships aren't as good as they could be. He's not perfect, but I think he's tried. Like I look at other teams like the Islanders and the Islanders are the prime example right now, and even Boston tried at least to make some moves, bringing in Lindholm and Zadorov, but like. I don't know. I think Drury's aggressive, and I like that in a GM. But it doesn't always work. But I'd rather that than a guy who sits back and doesn't do anything.
Yeah, for sure. It's frustrating as a fan too, especially if you have a team that's struggling and there's nothing happening, and you're just kind of seeing the same personnel going out night after night and not getting results. You definitely want your GM to be active, or at least kick the can, try something. It's funny because that was like a little bit of Rob Blake's criticism amongst Kings fans is, like he's not more active, but then when he is active, you have something like the Dubois trade happen, and then the fans jump down his throat because that one did not work out. But it is what it is. But speaking of the Kings, so. One thing I wanted to talk to you about, too, is, a lot gets made, and I think reasonably so. I might be a little bit of a homer here, but a lot gets made about a guy like Anze Kopitar getting kind of looked over when it comes to award time or, getting, acknowledgement from the NHL. The NHL Network just shared a graphic that had their top 20 centers. Current top 20 centers in the NHL, and Kopitar was not on there. So it's just, kind of things like that kind of happen a lot. And I'm sure it happened, everyone who's a fan or rides for any team is always going to, find a gripe. But do you feel like there is any real sort of East Coast bias?
Yeah, 1,000%. We had an argument not too long ago about who's a better player, Kopitar or Bergeron. And, being on the East Coast, you automatically just think Bergeron. But when you look at the stats, like, it's definitely closer than a lot of people think. I think Anze Kopitar, was a more prolific goal scorer than Bergeron is. I don't have the stats in front of me, but, he's probably put up if I had to guess, at least 3 30-goal seasons and probably like 6 to 8 20-goal seasons. And I'm sure Bergeron's up there as well, but I think Kopitar's a more dangerous offensive player and has probably had more 70, 80, 90. Like, has Bergeron ever had a 90-point season? I know Kopitar has. I don't know if that's something we could pull up. I could try to look it up right now. But I know it's not all about points. But listen, I also think people aren't staying up late at night to watch the LA Kings play hockey. Like that, they haven't been all that exciting the past couple of years, and that's the reason why as well. I think being on the East Coast, it's more accessible to watch those games, so that's a bit of a difference maker as well. But yeah, Patrice Bergeron never even had an 80-point season. Kopitar had a 90-point season, an 80-point season, and multiple 70-point seasons. So when it comes to production, I mean, the numbers support that Kopitar might be the better player. Yeah. And I think he's only been a dash 3 or 4 times, 5 times in his career. Now I'm going to pull up his numbers and see if I'm correct because I'm just going off the top of my head here. Bergeron was never a dash ever, which is pretty insane. But yeah, there's definitely an East Coast bias to answer your question. And Andrei Kopitar is probably one of the more underappreciated guys in the history of the NHL.
Yeah. I mean,
just looking at career points, Kopitar has 1,250 points in 1,411 games. Bergeron had 1,040 points in 1,294 games. And Bergeron's plus minus is way better, but like the stats are somewhat similar. Yeah, Bergeron had 427 goals. Kopitar has 431.
Yeah, I mean, I love Bergeron. I think that's a total fair comparison.
I mean, but Bergeron just gets way more love, and I think that's because the original 6 franchise, they've been to a Cup final recently, multiple Cup finals. Obviously, the Kings had their too, but it's been like a while since LA has had real success.
Yeah, running into the Oilers every year in the first round and getting kind of beat up, it's gets a little old after a while. And like you said, the style of hockey that the Kings have kind of played, I've been a diehard Kings guy since I was 7 years old. Mm-hmm. It's hard for me sometimes to get through games, just stylistically. It's not the best, nor do they have, any sort of fun guy like Matt Rempe, running around, which certainly people could say what they want. That guy puts asses in seats.
I love him.
I know if I was in New York, I would be in a seat.
I love him.
Yeah, I mean, talk a little bit about, especially for those who aren't too aware of a guy like Matt Rempe coming up with the Rangers. He's kind of a player you just don't even see anymore. But
he's suspended for 8 games.
Yeah, but I mean, it's almost like someone put a player in a time capsule from like the early 2000s, and he landed in Madison Square Garden. But the guy made a ton of noise last season, and what was your reaction to first seeing Rempe blast onto the scene?
Well, I've never seen anything like it. I haven't, and I still don't know if I ever will. And I have a lot of things, opinions about Matt Rempe, honestly, and the way he's been handled. But one thing I said last year, which has been now like my staple when I go to Matt Rempe and talk about Matt Rempe, is like I know it sounds ridiculous every time someone hears it for the first time, but he's almost like Santa Claus, right? Where like some people believe in it, some people don't believe in it, and you kind of know it's not real, but it's impactful, right? And there's something there. Right? Like, I don't know what it is about Matt Rempe, but there's something there that people feel. Not everyone thinks it's real, but there are people who think there's something there and something impactful and something that just changes the entire atmosphere of the building and the team. And I think that's hard to deny. But what I will say about the way he's been handled is, and this is a whole developmental issue, is that when Matt Rempe's down in Hartford, he's playing power play, he's playing 15 plus minutes a night. And when he comes up to the Rangers, he's not playing in the same situations that he does down in Hartford. So when he is up with the Rangers, I think he has to overcompensate a bit, or feels like he has to overcompensate a bit, because he's not getting the same amount of ice time, same amount of exposure, and same amount of opportunities and in the rhythm that he gets down there. And, listen, he hasn't said this directly, but something I talked to a friend of mine who plays in the AHL, I won't say which organization, but like he says what's so good about the way they do things is that a player in the AHL that gets called up to the NHL, when they get sent back down, doesn't automatically get put on the first line, doesn't automatically get power play time. The role they play in the NHL is the role that they play in the AHL, so that when they're called up, they're ready and they're prepared. But not everyone does it that way. Like usually it's the leading scorer on the AHL roster who gets called up, and then he's thrown on the third or fourth line, when in the AHL he's a first line guy and a goal scorer and gets power play time. But that's not the case in the NHL. So I think there's a little bit of a disconnect there with how organizations are handling these prospects, because when you want a guy to succeed at the NHL level, you got to put him in a comfortable situation in the AHL level, so that when he's called up, it's almost second nature. And there are some guys who can do it. Like Jonny Brodzinski was a guy who can play up and down the lineup in the NHL, and he's an LA guy. I know you know him as well. But Brodzinski, like, he was the top line scorer in the AHL, but he also killed penalties. He can play defense, and he went up and down the lineup in the NHL because he was able to. But not everyone's like that. I know that's kind of a bit of a ramble, but those are my thoughts on Matt Rempe. I'm a Matt Rempe supporter. I think his energy changes the entire team. And listen, while he does make some mistakes here and there, he's 22 years old, and I think he can still learn.
At the end of the day, it's the entertainment business. I am super entertained watching him run around out there and cause hell. Hey, every other NHL team, they're free to sign an enforcer as well.
Yeah.
So can only complain so much about it. But Johnny, I know you're a very, very busy dude, so I'm not going to take up any more of your time. I really appreciate you jumping on. This was really cool, man.
Thank you, Nick.
So, yeah, just you do a great job with everything, man. I love the on ice, the skate interviews, and, your stuff with Colby Cohen. He's also really, really good. But yeah, for anyone watching, where would you like people to kind of follow along your content?
Every morning, Daily Faceoff YouTube channel, 9 to 10 a.m. or 10:15ish. Morning Cup of Hockey. That's where I talk every day, or try to talk every day if Colby isn't talking over me. But yeah, it's a lot of fun. We have a lot of cool different guests on, and we listen to our listeners. Like our episode today, actually, like the chat kind of drove the conversation. So if you want your hockey opinions to be heard, and you want your I guess to have a conversation about hockey, like that's where the show to do it. So come join us every morning, 9 a.m. Eastern on Daily Faceoff. But Nick, thank you. I'll actually be in LA, I believe, for the Rangers-Kings game. So
nice.
If you're at the game, we'll meet up or something. And I think I'm going as a fan, actually, so I could have a beer with you too.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Right on, man. Yeah, let me know for sure. That sounds awesome. All right, Johnny, thanks so much, man. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Talk soon.